How? Um, Namaste in Hindi and Tanse in Tanse in hello in Cree. That's the only Cree word I know. I am Cree, and I actually know how to speak more German than my own language, like Ich liebe dich, Heinebein. I love you, chicken legs. So, it's an honor to be here, and my name is Larry, and I'm glad that you are taking the time just to come and interact with me. I am of the belief that if you're learning nothing and falling asleep, you're more than welcome to sleep or leave. It's okay. But to counteract that, I would rather we just engage in a dialogue and a conversation, which means I did have a slide at the end of the presentation which says questions and comments. But you know what? I'd like to give you freedom to interact all the way through. So if you'd like to just scream, yell, jump, say whatever, like feel free, okay? I'm First Nations, and I personally don't get offended very easily. I'm highly tolerant. I married a Mennonite girl named Giesbrecht, so Joyce Giesbrecht, and we have really helped each other balance ourselves out in terms of how we relate, both to one another but cross-culturally. So, how about I pray? I think that would be important. Let's pray. God, you are good. You are kind. I thank you that you gave me my little grandbaby boy who's now going to be 9 this year, and he's the most gracious and kind little son. I love him so much. And Lord, the image of God is stamped on his heart. He bears your image, and he is kind just like you. So I pray that even as we talk here about our hearts and lives, that you would help us to do the same, to be kind to one another, and to experience you in a new way. Jesus, I pray these things in your name, and Spirit of God, Holy Spirit, you are a gracious person. I love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Just a few beginning things. It's now white man time. It's 2:45. And I do want to honor you. We were supposed to do an hour, so if we're done by 2:30, we're supposed to start at 2:30 and quit at 3:30. So that's white man time. But in terms of my background, this is First Nations time. This is called the talking stick. Whoever holds the stick gets to talk. So if I was to talk for the next 5 hours, then that would be my privilege, but I won't do that. I've learned to be a bit like you guys. So I'm going to talk very freely and very vulnerably, very open, very honest, very direct, not beat around the bush. And if I insult you, please let me know that I insult you. If you say something that insults me, I'll say the same. But you know what? Again, I said I'm highly tolerant, so feel free to say anything you want to say. There are just a couple other things. As an Indian, I have a cell phone too. And I have some gum. We are sharing people. I'm taking one because I'll need it later. But then the rest of you could pass them around. Okay? So, just as a matter of, how about we go to the next slide? Our buddy back there, Michael's going to help me out. I'm going to be talking about understanding non-Aboriginal, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal worldviews. And next slide. How important are bridge builders when it comes to cultural differences? How important is that? How many of you would consider yourself a bridge builder? Like, just let me, okay. So there's a number of white folks who, and again, I'll use the word white, and I'll use the word Indian, and we'll talk about all of those details and dynamics as we go through. A number of you white folks have been really called and gifted by God to be able to bridge relationship between your culture and my people. And for some reason, God has helped me over the last 64 years to live and breathe in your white man's world and have picked up a lot of your values and have become quite white inside. My wife, who's Joyce Giesbrecht, who's Mennonite, you know, she's more Indian than I am. She works in an Indian environment, an Indian office, Indian people, and she knows a lot more about Indian history than I do. And the word disclaimer, I think means, correct me if I'm wrong, here's a disclaimer. I do not know everything that needs to be known about First Nations people and Caucasian people. And I have many brothers and sisters who make presentations like this, and they all come from their own point of view. And so it is with me. I can only tell you what I know to be true in my heart and mind, and really not talk for another brother or sister. I know that I was at a conference just a month or two ago, and one of my native brothers, who was not necessarily a believer, spoke from the white privilege foundation. Well, what's white privilege mean? Anybody? Speak up. Built-in advantages for white people. Well, you know what? 2 days ago is the first time I finally understood what it means. In all of my 64 years, by the way, I'm going to be 65 in November, I want to say, give me my money. You know, my old age check, give me my money. But I just, honestly, up until 2 days ago, my wife finally just said to me what white privilege is. And even though my buddy, my native brother, talked about it 2 months ago, I thought something different. I thought he was talking about like the haves and the have-nots. And there's some truth in that. But one of the things my wife said, "Hun, don't you realize it's really talking about racism? White privilege is racism. If you have an Indian walk into a grocery store, and you have a white man walk into a grocery store, whom will they watch? The white man." I was thinking if the security guard is Indian, he's probably watching the white man. If the white man is the security guard, he's probably watching the Indian. So there's this thing called white privilege, and many have written about it. And again, to be honest with you, I didn't really know what that meant up until 2 days ago. So there's a racist tinge to that. And that's part of things we want to just like talk about here. But before we do, I just want to say, I used to pastor First Nations Community Church for 16 years here in Winnipeg. The Mennonite Brethren of Manitoba called me one time years ago, almost 30 years. "Larry, would you like to go into ministry?" They took me out for breakfast, and when they said that, I just burst into tears. I was 36. I wanted to go into ministry all my life. And I just cried. I said, yes. So I went into ministry. So I spent 16 years as a church planner, partnered with the Christian Missionary Alliance, and ultimately the church took on the Christian Missionary Alliance identity about 5-6 years later. So I pastored for 16 years, and then I went into a director's role, which means I just oversaw the church I was pastoring and all the other churches under the Christian Missionary Alliance. So that my 12-year limitation came up in September last year, 2016, meaning the leadership of Sheena May have 12-year tenure, boom, or not tenure, limitation, and then you have to step down. So I did. So on end of September, I stepped down as director after 12 years, and then I stepped right into the next second at midnight. I was now Prison Fellowship Canada. Prison Fellowship Canada was looking for a regional rep in Manitoba. And when I read their job description, the national director sent it to me, and I read it, and for the first time in my life, I actually enjoyed reading a job description because it was highly relational. I said, wow, I can do this. So there was this little tinge in my heart, this like little flame. I can do this. And so I went down to Toronto, and their office is right beside the airport, and I dropped in, became very, very good friends instantly. And so they loved me and I loved them, and they asked me to be the rep. So now for 9 months I've been the regional rep for Manitoba with Prison Fellowship Canada. So this little Prison Fellowship or prison pastor, allows me to go into Stoney every week and work with 15, 20 guys, of which some of them are Aboriginal. Just for your information, there's about 40-some thousand prisoners in Canada. 60 to 70% of them are Aboriginal. Now you got to keep in mind that Aboriginal people are only 1.4 million people in Canada compared to 29 million people who are non-Aboriginal. And out of the 29 million Aboriginal, or 29 million people in Canada, there's less of them than my people in the jails. Like, I'm not a mathematician, but if I was to say there's 29 million non-Aboriginals and there's 29 million Aboriginals, and there's this little few, like 30,000 Aboriginal or 20,000 non-Aboriginals in prison, you would probably have hundreds of thousands, if not a million or so Aboriginal people. So just kind of setting some stage for interaction here. In regards to Prison Fellowship Canada, we're kind of known for Angel Tree Christmas. We do this every year. We take applications from a prisoner, and then they say, could you please send a gift to my child? We talk to people like you in churches, and we say, we have 200 kids in Manitoba who are waiting for a gift, and we would like volunteers to buy a gift for $30, wrap it, and we will organize it so you could take your gift to that little child down the road and say it's from your daddy or your mommy. So last year was the first time I did it. I went online, you apply, there's one page, submit it, and then they send me a little name of the child, and they say she lives right on Selkirk. So I said to my little grandson, who's 8 at the moment, I said, sweetheart, would you like to come with me to deliver the gift to this little girl? She's 8 years old. He goes, yes. So we drove down to Selkirk. He walks into, up to the house. We ring the doorbell. We walk in, and the mom calls the little girl. She comes walk around the corner. Right away, my little son walks up and hands this gift and says, this is from your daddy. And she just smiled and took it. It was really awesome. So that's one thing we do. Is again, in Christmas, there's going to be a real push for Angel Tree where we can give gifts to kids of prisoners and to keep the family relationships connected. We also do Angel Tree camping. We pay up to $300 a child, a prisoner's child, to go to camp. So, and very quickly, I'm presently teaching Malachi Dads to the men in Stoney. It's a series on the heart of God. There's 19 qualities of a man of God. And so we talked to them about that. We just now have, we're just going to start introducing the prisoner's journey. And it's a number of week series for specifically prisoners. And it's all based on the Gospel of Mark. So that's just something about Prison Fellowship Canada. Any questions or comments before I start talking about Indian people and white people? Jeannie, you're smiling. Why? I like it, Jeannie. Jeannie and I went to Briarcrest Bible College together way back in the 70s, so that's about 80 years ago. So let's take a look at understanding Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal worldviews. As a bit of introduction, I've kind of shared who I am, and I just say, everything I say, feel free to agree or disagree, okay? Please feel free to disagree and interact, okay? Just a little bit about my family. That's my wife, Joyce, just beside me. And my son, who's Aboriginal, he has white face, blue eyes, red beard. He's a little challenged when he introduces himself as a First Nations Treaty Status Indian. Because that's exactly what he is, and so is my wife. We got married in '84, just before the government changed the law. So my wife is Aboriginal. Okay? And then you have my little grandson there, and his mom's up beside her, and then my son's wife down there. And the next slide, poof, we just have a little grandson. My son and his wife just had a grandson. So my daughter, if you know anything, well, you probably don't, but my daughter was at Bible college, and she came home one day. She was 18, 19, and said to Mom and Dad, "I need to talk to you, Mom, Dad." And we sat in the living room, and she was crying, and she said, "Dad, Mom, I'm pregnant." And she was not married. And we sat and we cried and cried and cried and cried. And so we just let her talk. Just let her talk. She talked and talked. And we just cried. And as she's talking, I'm thinking, wow, my little girl. When my little son was born, Jamie, the first words he heard Daddy say is, I was there in the birthing room. He came out of his mother's womb, and they put him on this little table, cleaned him off, and they walked away, and I stood, and his eyes were closed, and I waited until he opened his eyes to say anything. And I was down like this, and as soon as he opened his eyes and he looked at me in mine, I said, Jamie, I love you. My daughter, a couple years later, was born. Same thing. I waited for her little eyes to look at mine, and I said, Bethany, I love you. And when she came home and told us she was pregnant, I was thinking, man, I said to my daughter right from my first word, Bethany, I love you. And I thought, how could I ever stop loving my daughter? So I just decided I will love her. So then she finished talking, and Joyce shared her heart, and then turned to Dad, and I shared my heart. And I just got up and I held her, and I cried and I cried. I hugged her so much. I just kept saying, I love you so much. I love you so much. And haven't stopped loving her. When my little grandson was born, I have never once talked to him about, in a negative way, his reality. If you would ask my son, why does Papa love you? He will say, because I am special and kind. He would say those words exactly. Because right from the beginning of his birth, I have told him, I love you because you are special and kind. And I just did it today again. Every day I've said that to my little grandson. You know, he's one of the most kindest little boys. He's one of the most kindest little boys at school. And God has gifted me with his precious little soul, and he bears the image of the living God. And you know, God has been really speaking to me the last while about people. I drive downtown, I see a native person walk by, drunk, and I go, oh man, the image of the living God stamped on his heart, in his human soul. I see a white person walk by, wow, the image of God. And I've been to India, and I've seen people who are deformed, some of it intentionally. And you look at them and you say, the image of the living God. Like, wow, God, every human flesh bears the image of God. And so God has really blessed me with an awesome family. So it's 15 minutes. Now let's go on here. Let me talk to you a little bit. First of all, I'm kind of a visionary. And when I was in pastoring, I had big hopes and dreams. I dreamt that, or I drew this actually, a big teepee structured church downtown, and I thought, man, we could let's be a people of value and a people with a different identity. Let's be a people who have health, and we're healthy and we're hopeful. Let me ask you a question. When you think Indian, what do you think? Go ahead. Somebody who cannot grow a really good beard. You're right, because most native people who have more native blood don't grow beards, and they don't lose their hair. Like this, okay? I do, because my grandfather was a white man like you. He really was. They took him, in 1900, they took him into the government said, put a treaty list together. Because he's married to my grandma and it was relational, they took him in as one and they gave him a treaty number, and he became treaty status, therefore I become. Otherwise I'd be Métis. So that's a good point. Yes? They misunderstood what? And hurt, okay. So when you think of Indian, what do you think? Just be very raw. Yes?
First time I heard about Indian Chicanas where my friends go and get their smoke, so I didn't know such a thing existed. So I think it's smoking.
Smoking, okay. Jeannie, what do you think? Yep, when you hear the word Indian. Poverty, okay. Poor. Good point. You know, I came to Winnipeg when I was 16. I came to Christ at age 16, and after a few months, I moved to Winnipeg, and I've been in Winnipeg ever since. I walked the city streets, and I had food to eat, and I had clothes to wear, and I didn't realize that I was poor until a white man told me that I was poor. I said, I am? I didn't know that. So poverty. What else? Purposeless. Okay. Anybody? Dick? Okay, they're gifted but suppressed. Yes? Okay, crazy sense of humor. Okay, and there's a reason for that.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, yes, Helen.
The Mennonite or the white people, their jokes are about people. The Mennonite, our jokes are language related.
Hmm.
The Cree people, their jokes are circumstantial. If a kid falls onto the mud, they all laugh and they have a good laugh about it and then it's finished.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Let me just say, there's reason why we are humorous and it's not all positive. Okay? We are humorous, it is positive, but it's not always. Yes? Okay. If you just speak up so everybody could hear you. Brother was just saying that Indian people were known for our land, but we traded it for alcohol. Okay, that's another comment. Yes?
The other thing that comes to mind is fetal alcohol.
Okay. Okay. So, yes?
My introduction
Yep.
was we live in a little rural community village, and from time to time this car full of Indians would come door to door and come begging for people to ask for food. And I was scared because these three people I saw the car coming up right beside me.
Yeah, yeah. So you hear words. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Right, right. So you think of, you feel fear. Okay.
My Aboriginal, just out of Boston Forsyth, he would meet some of the staff and we would look at we both had practice
Hmm.
well, we were going to production afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Right. So our yeah. So our sister's saying that here's an Indian little boy scared of Indians. As an example, when I was growing up as a little guy, 5, 6 of us guys in the neighborhood, we'd all run down the bank close to the rapids, and we made little trails and stuff, and we played games all day. You know what we played? We played cowboys and cowboys. You be good cowboys, we're the bad cowboys. Nobody wanted to be the what? Nobody wanted to be the Indian.
In Scotland, I was always the Indian, but we didn't know anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, you're hearing a message, okay? You're hearing white privilege, you're hearing, let me say this, is I believe, honestly believe, that racism lives in the heart of every human being. If you're breathing, you're racist. You have Indian people who are racist against other people, you have white people who are racist against other people, and so on, yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm. 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 Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Awesome. Awesome. You know, I would say the majority of comments related to the word Indian is not as positive. It's more negative, I think, here. I just talked to a brother, guy I really love, like I really respect him. A large church in the city. We had lunch together the other day, and he said, and I asked him too, like just met him just a few weeks ago, and he wanted to hear about Indian people. He wanted to hear about Jerusalem. How do we minister to First Nations? And so my first question to him, I say to him, what do you think when you hear the word Indian? He says poverty. And he says sad, I think of lazy, and so on. So I'm going to keep going on through these things, and we're going to keep trying to digest some of this stuff, okay? So in terms of big vision, I used to have a vision as a pastor to see 20 healthy, self-sustaining Aboriginal churches come into existence by 2020, led by 20 healthy Aboriginal pastors. I wrote that the night before I spoke at our National Christian Mission Alliance conference, and they asked me to stand up and speak 3 minutes, and I started with that. And as soon as I said that, they all cheered. Like, I go, whoa, I didn't expect that. But you know, somehow white men really think strategic and numbers, and you know, that's how they do. And so this Indian's starting to think a little like a white man. And so that's been for the last 30 years I've had that heart. We have one in Winnipeg. If I look across Canada, there may be two. Now we're looking at Christianity having an impact on my people in 400 years, and yet we just have a healthy, stable church here or there. Yeah, there's probably more. I'm just maybe not always aware. There's some smaller groups that are really healthy. But you know what? I'm looking at it from a white man's point of view. We own a building. We buy a big building. We have lots of money. Everybody's paying their tithe. And we're growing, and we're 100, and we're 2. Like one day I was passing a church, and I said to a brother, a white man, I said, yeah, our church is really doing good. We have 120 people regular. And he goes, oh, is that ever small? And I'm thinking, hey, it's really big when you think across Canada what a church looks like. See, another dynamic is I've kind of taken on a value system, yours, and I've become thinking like and having expectations like a white man, and it does a disjustice to my people. Like, I need a shift. I need a shift and look at ministry different. Let's go on. So we wanted churches all across Canada, and that didn't happen. I want to kind of say, you know, there's two basic longings, and this is a biblical truth. There's two basic longings of the heart. Do you know what they are? What? Security and? Significance, yes. Next. So there's those two basic longings that God has created every human being with. Whether you're Indian, white, Mennonite, black, Chinese, whatever. We all have those two basic longings. Significance, why? Anybody? We're created in the image of the living God. That makes me valuable. What about significance or security? Why security, biblically? What brings people the most secure sense of security biblically? God. God loving people unconditionally is where security lies. So, we all have those two basic longings. If you go to the next one, the white man tends to get that sense of significance and security. In my opinion, disagree if you want, but I think you guys get it from your function. How you do stuff and what you pursue and your individual pursuit of something and your stability and so on. And you get it from the way you function. You get it like you build the big cities and you build Torontos and Vancouvers and you build things, like you do a bunch of that. Now, let me step back and say, I know I'm generalizing, okay? And it's unsafe to generalize and say everybody's like that, because that's not true. But as a culture, there's a basic motivation. And I would say that the white culture in Canada, the European, has a functional motivation. If you go to the next, First Nations people have a relational motivation. It's belonging. It's whom you are connected to, not what you do. Next, I'm going to go through these. We want to do a bit of cultural value comparison. Next. When it comes to identity, people have asked me, okay, why do you use the word Indian? In fact, I talked to my bosses and my prison fellowship guys down in in Toronto a week ago, and I did a session like this. And right away, one of them says, Larry, I don't like it when you use the word Indian. I say, why? Why do you think? Why do you smile, brother?
The word of Indian refers to India.
Okay, good. It refers to India. Anybody else? It's not politically correct. Okay. It's a negative connotation, at least in some circles. So they say, well, should you be called Native, Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nations, First Peoples? Some of the political correctness they're trying to address. Let me just make this comment. I don't know of any other people in history whose identity has been shifted and shaped and changed and mixed and meshed and like over their lifetime in their history. Like we were Indian, and then we were, like, for example, we went through history where Indian people weren't even human. Like, there's documents in Ottawa that say that the definition of a human being is anybody other than a Indian. Like, it's in writing. We were not able to vote until the 1960s, for example, and on and on and on. There's all kinds of things about the words. But even our identity has been shifted. White women would marry, an Indian woman would marry a white guy. Now you're no longer an Indian, you're a white man, you're a white lady. Because she would lose her treaty status. Like I said, my wife would become an Indian, and now she's in Indian status. But some guys, and we'll talk about it a little later, some people have been ashamed of our identity, that they've denied that they're even Indian. Like, it goes on and on and on. Let's just keep going here first. When you look at time between the two cultures, the white man, the Caucasian, looks at time linear, past, present, future, kind of like that. Native people kind of look at it circular or seasonal kind of experience. It kind of repeats itself. You come to treaty days, and treaty days is coming again. So we tend to function different when it comes to time. Next. Thinking. Next one there. Look, what's that? A little tree goes by, okay? In a mind of a white person, if you don't mind me, I'm just going to use the word white. If you're offended, let me know. You could call me Indian, I'm okay. But let's at least talk about it, okay? When a white man thinks about a tree, press the next button. Their mind thinks theoretical. Well, you know what? Let's determine how old this tree is. Cut it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, blah. This is 362.5 days old. Like theoretically. An Indian, on the other hand, looks at a tree, press it, and he thinks, fire. Cut it down, throw it in the water, keep warm. And that's kind of how we thought, quite concrete. Okay? So, next one. When I went to Bible college with Jeannie back in the early 70s, I took philosophy. I was one of those Indians coming off the reserve, going into a white man's school who thinks concrete and not theoretical. So when I took philosophy in my first semester, at the end of the term, I got 3% on the whole course. Okay? Failed it, and it wasn't until my fourth year, you got to remember this too, I squished a 3-year program, a pastoral program, into 4 years and 3 summers. I did. And I failed 12 courses. And I redid all of them because God had given me a desire to go to Bible college and get to know Jesus. And I just loved Bible college. I loved, because I loved you, Jeannie. I loved you and all those people. I loved you so much. But I hated myself, and I didn't know that. Because every time I failed a course, there was like a dagger in my spirit that just twisted. Because I remember as a young boy, I just came to Christ at age 16, and I said, you know, if I'm ever going to be somebody, I'm standing in a high school like this. I went to washroom, came back, and nobody in the hallway. It's a long hallway, and I'm standing there. This is the day after I came to Christ. And I thought, I'm standing there thinking, wow, 40 this is back in the 60s. Wow, there's 40 white teachers, and there's 600 native kids, and I could never be a teacher because I'm an Indian. And this is what I said. I made a vow, and I started on a path of sin. I said, if I'm ever going to be somebody, I need to leave the reserve and get educated in a white man's school, and then I'll be a person of value. Then no one will ever say to Larry Wilson, you are just a dirty, stinking, rotten, drunken Indian. Nobody will say that to me. Now, if you hear what I'm saying in my vow and my lie is, if I'm ever going to be somebody, what is that? What are you hearing in that statement? If I'm ever going to be somebody, what is that? What are you hearing? Significance or value? Like, if I'm ever going to have value, and the lie and the vow I made is I was going to make it happen. I was going to pursue academics. I was going to go to Bragg. I'm going to get my master's until I'm in my master's degree. I'm 36 years old. I've been a Christian 20 years. I'm sitting in my master's degree with a counseling group of about 8 of us, and I'm the only Indian. And one of the women just was crying, pouring her heart out, saying, I hate myself. I hate who I am. I hate that I'm white. And for the first time in my life, I said, I'm going to stop running from what I feel about myself. And every time she said something, she spoke the words of my heart. And she said, I hate myself. And I said, I hate myself. And I just started to cry. I was in tears. I was weeping as she shared in her heart. As the teacher processed her pain, she just turned to me and said, Larry, what's wrong? What's happening in your heart? And I yelled out, I hate Larry Wilson. I hate that I'm an Indian. I loathe myself. And I did. But for the first time in my life, I faced what I really felt about myself. And all of a sudden, this big pain of denial, like it was like a big world. This pain was moving up. I could just see it visually. Whoa. And as soon as I looked underneath, like somebody took a baseball bat and hit me right across the heart, and something underneath the pain hurt me even more than the pain of low self-esteem. It was my sin. Because all of a sudden, in a second, in a moment, I'm 36 years old. That moment in age 16 just flew by. If I'm ever going to be somebody, I need to leave the reserve and get educated in a white man's school. And all of a sudden, the Lord showed me the sin in that. And I just yelled out to God, oh, God, forgive me. And as soon as I said that, instant peace. And this little verse, this is like one of these PowerPoints that you could start a little dot and it goes poof. Well, this verse came like this. Therefore, being in Christ, you're a new creation. And I said, that's who I am. It's who I am in Christ and Christ in me that makes me a valuable human being. And so I finished off 2 more weeks, and I left school, and I didn't finish my last year of master's. And I said, and I still remember driving down the street from Providence saying, I do not need to be an educated Indian to be a person of value. Jesus, you are my value. It's who you are and who you are in me and me in you that makes me a valuable human being. And so God had released me from that vow and forgave me for that sin. And just up in 2008, I get a call from a friend from Carey Theological College. They asked me, Larry, would you accept an honorary doctorate? And, hold on. I need to blow my nose. And it was Sunday morning. I just got ready for church. I'm sitting at my desk. She phones me and offers me that. And I thought, oh man, I just was silent for about 20 seconds. She says, Larry, are you there? I said, Barb, I need to talk to my wife about this. Could I get back to you? She says, call me tomorrow morning. So I hung up the phone. I got up out of my desk, walked to the bedroom, and my wife met me in the hallway, and we just hugged, and I said, honey, you wouldn't believe it. I'd just been offered an honorary doctorate. And I said, but I feel so unworthy, so unworthy of this. She says, honey, just accept it. So I just ran into my office. I phoned my son, he's driving from Providence to our house that morning. I say, son, I've been just offered an honorary doctorate. And his first words were, Dad, accept it. They'll raise your salary. That's what he said. And so I hung up and I walked in the kitchen, and here's my little daughter. She's about 17 at the time, 16, 17. And I hugged her and I said, sweetheart, I've been just offered an honorary doctorate, but I feel so unworthy of accepting it. And I said, I feel so human. And I was equating unworthy and human together. And you know her first words? She says, Dad, if you don't accept it, another human will. And I go, wow. So God really spoke to my heart. We flew to Vancouver. We're driving to the college. And again, I'm driving, my wife's here, my son's right behind me, my daughter's there. We're going to this grad where they're going to give me an honorary doctorate. And I'm driving and I'm saying, wow, I said to my wife and kids, and I feel so unworthy. My son says to me, sitting right behind me, he says, Dad, do you know Jesus as your Savior? I said, yes, I do, son, I do. He says, Dad, you are so unworthy of knowing Christ. What's an honorary doctorate compared to knowing Christ? And again, the Lord spoke to me, just kind of wiped away that fear. I went and accepted it. They put the hat on me and the coat, and I asked the president, am I a doctor yet? Right on stage, and he says, yep. And I go, whoa, folks, just to tell you this, I'm still so undeserving of that. I'm still so unworthy of that. But I say this, is that for some reason, whatever the honorary doctorate offers me in terms of how it impacts society, positive or negative, whatever, I didn't pursue it. And I feel like my choice to give up my pursuit of education to be a person of value, God just simply said, look, you've honored me, I honor you. And so I accept it. So let's go to the next one, and I'll tell you this. So after 4 years, I take philosophy again. I'm sitting in philosophy halfway through the semester, and all of a sudden, ding, wow, that's what philosophy means. All of a sudden, I began to think theoretical. It took me 4 years to start thinking more theoretical than just concrete. So when you're working with my people, like a lot of us are just thinking concrete. And you're talking words, and they're going, yeah. They're really saying, I don't have a clue what you said. I don't have a clue what you said. So let's keep going. And I'm watching the white man time here. Let's make a decision. It's almost 2:30 when I should have been done. You want to quit right at 2:30? could we go, say, to 1:45 when we started? Is that okay? And if you have to leave, no, good. You know, good. If you have to go, feel free to go. I'm okay. But I will, let me promise you, at 1:45, I'm done, okay? So let's go through these real quick. Yep. Yep. What's that? Oh, can you have 3 minutes? At the end? Okay. Look, when it comes to time, first, white people tend to expect change to take place. Aboriginal people tend to cling to traditional ways. They're not very willing to change. For example, there's this relational pull, okay? You got to stay the same as us. If you change, then you're becoming like a white man. They call you an apple. Red on the outside, and you just want to be a white man. White on the inside. So there's that pull. Let's keep going so we could maybe get through this stuff. When it comes to planning, my wife's white. She likes planning the future. She likes a calendar. First Nations people tend to focus on the present. And don't really. I'm an Indian who I sit on the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada National Board. I sit on the Promise Keepers National Board. I sit on Briarcrest Board, and we're always talking about 3 years down the road. And I'm going, you guys, like you white guys, I think, you know. So, but that's how you think. Native people are not thinking as far down the road. Next one. When it comes to personality, white people are quite fairly assertive. Native people are a bit passive. Next. When it comes to influence, white people are persuasive, forceful, and aggressive. Native people are indirect, passive, and slow. My sister, my older sister, just said to me just a few weeks ago, she says, when I first came to Winnipeg as a young girl, I couldn't believe it. I'm walking down the street, and all of a sudden I get these white people, they're all rah, 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 and I'm standing there like, quiet, 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 quiet. Like, it's amazing, just the dynamic of the two cultures. Next. There's this thing called power of influence, where you have a macro and next a micro. The big tends to pull on the little. Next. There's this pull where a big society pulls on a little society. Like, for example, this big macro could be a whole Indian culture. It's relational. And one guy wants to be an educated Indian. And he wants to leave and become different. Well, there's this pull. Stay the same. Don't go get educated. Stay with us. Like, there's this pull. Next. Individuality. White people, the individual of each person is taken for granted, but in Aboriginal people, individuals are part of the whole. So we're not as individualistic is basically what the thing is. Next. When it comes to eyes, white people tend to look someone into your eyes like boom, like that, you know. And Native people tend to look like down like this. Why? Anybody? Respect? Okay, slapping them in the face or something negative in that. Many would say respect. In my opinion, much of it is low self-esteem. Unworthy of looking into another person's soul. Because I really don't want you to see the shame in mine. Like,
Is that because the white people have always
that's a big part of it. We've been superiority, inferiority kind of thing. But it'll come through, hopefully, within the next little minute. Next. When it comes to age, white people tend to emphasize youth. First Nations tend to emphasize elders. Next. When it comes to relationships, the white people tend to have fewer, stronger ties. Yep. And Native people tend to have extended family ties. Okay? That's just part of the culture. Next. When it comes to possessions, white people tend to acquire and save, and Native people tend to acquire and share. An example, I went moose hunting a number of years ago. I was quite white at the time already. I was going up north to Beaver Lake area with 2 Native guys, and I'm going to get some moose meat to put in my freezer that'll last me a year or 2. We get up there, we shoot a moose, put him in the boat, take him back to the reserve. They drag the moose up to the rock. A bunch of people came from the reserve, and we went back down, cleaned the boat. By the time we cleaned the boat and went back up there, I go, where's the moose? Everything was gone, the skin, the bones, the meat. I go, where's the meat? And the guys say, well, everybody comes, it just takes their chunk and they go home. We do stuff to share with the community. And I go, whoa, am I ever white? You know, I just really changed within. Next. White people are quite vocal, except this Indian. Indian people are quite quiet. And next. When it comes to social sins that affect productivity are bad in a white man's world. Social sins that affect relationship in a native world are bad. Like you could have 10 native guys all drinking, having a good time, and if they all are good friends and you go home, it's not a social sin. But if it leads into all kinds of break of relationship, then social sin becomes bad. Social. Okay, next. I'm just trying to go through these things quickly. Associational groups. White people based primarily on voluntary association. In other words, you kind of choose your ones you relate to well. In native world, persons' primary ties are the kin group, meaning our culture is made up of kin groups. You have 10 families there, they all belong. 2 families there, they belong. 6 families there, like you're in groups. And you're born into it, you don't choose it. In a white man's world, you tend to choose your neighbors as your friends and those don't, and so on. Next. When it comes to materialism, white people, material things and possessions are valued for security. Native people, possessions and material things are important for use. Okay, next. When it comes to competition, white people tend to, for the benefit of the individual, native people tend to compete for the common good of the group. And again, I'm talking generalization, but I'm talking a major dynamic in a culture. Next. When it comes to leadership, yeah, white people are complex, highly organized, pyramidal structure with intense chain of command. Native people, simpler, loose, passive, indirect, goodwill more important than production and results. So again, a different motivation in the hearts of native people. Next. When it comes to progress, white people, one person's advance is not necessarily at the expense of another person's fall. It's kind of individualistic. But in a native world, the farther one family progresses materially, educationally, etc., the greater the fracture in the extended family unit. So progress is not always that's like, it's really, you know, let me say this. It's really hard for an Indian person to give their lives to Christ and become a born-again Christian and live like one. I went to school with 600 native kids. 2 of them claimed to be Christians and they lived like not the white man, but the devil. Not equating the two. No, I shouldn't joke like that. Two kids claimed to be a Christian and they lived like the devil. And I said, if I give my life to Christ, I do not want to live like the devil. I want to live like a Christian. But it was really hard because when you give your life to Christ and you want to live like a Christian, you become different than everybody else. That's why a lot of native people who give their lives to Christ are sucked back into a lifestyle. So it's very hard when you're working cross-culturally. Next. Achievement. White people, personal achievement is the measure of a person's worth and social status. Native people, the building of relationship is of greatest importance because they are the measure of one's success. So relationship is highly valued. Next. When it comes to communication, white people tend to talk, native people tend to listen, whether you agree or disagree. I just thought of a couple things I wanted to share in regards to this, that just communicate kind of white privilege and maybe racism. I have a good friend, like I love him with all my heart, I really do. I'm committed and sold out to him. When I told him, he's a pastor, I told him, you know, my daughter is pregnant. This is back when she got pregnant. He honestly shared with me his heart and he said, Larry, forgive me, but you know what I thought when you told me that? Just another Indian. He thought, just another Indian. I really love the guy. I have another brother down in Toronto and I really love him. He has millions of bucks. I've become his best friend. I've never asked him for a penny. But I've given my heart to him and so I'm probably the only Indian he knows. He had his Escalade stolen a while back, $100,000 vehicle. They found it on an Indian reservation north of Toronto, stripped and so on. And you know, he came to Promise Keepers and he said publicly, and with me there, he said, Larry, come stand beside me. So I stand, and he says, Larry, I just want to ask you for forgiveness. He says, when my Escalade was stolen, and they found it, the police phoned me and they said, it's on a reserve. My first thought was those damn Indians. And he said, as soon as I said it, I thought of Larry. And he said, God, forgive me. Forgive me. You know, we all struggle with this stuff. Like, this Indian struggles with stuff. As long as we breathe. How about we continue so we could get through? When it comes to spirituality, again, Native people or white people tend to dichotomize spiritual and natural. For example, take prayer out of the schools. You know, it's not in the schools. So we tend to divide. First Nations people look at spirituality and nature holistically as one. We don't subdivide. We don't divide. You go to any Native organization meeting, they all pray before they start. National, they do it. Every prayer meeting, we don't divide spirituality and nature. We see it holistic. Next. There's three kinds of Native people. Next, there's assimilated, deny their culture. There's a lot of people who are so ashamed of themselves, they don't want to be known as Indian. So there's a percentage of us who deny who we are. Next, there's traditional, not comfortable in the mainstream society. A lot of the Northerners. Next, there's the integrated, comfortable in both mainstream society and traditional ways. So I'm kind of maybe in the middle. Let's keep going so we could get through. When it comes to relationship to the land, Caucasian people and Native people look at land different. When you first, white man, go and meet a white man, what's the first question you ask? After you know each other's names, what do you ask? What's that? What's the weather? Or what do you do? When an Indian meets an Indian, what do they say? Where do you come from? That's what we do. We're connected more to land. Next. So you say, what do you do? We say, where are you from? Next. And again, next. Very quickly, the history of the Aboriginal land. And we just have a few minutes here, and I think it's important that I get through this. Next. Turtle Island. Long ago, the arrival of Europeans, Turtle Island, North America, was home to countless millions of First Nations people who lived in thousands of distinct societies. Next. Then treaties came. Treaties between white government and First Nations people. We are presently on Treaty 1 territory, where I'm from. And we are on it right now. Next. But the treaties, the land reserved for Aboriginal people was steadily whittled away after its original allocation. Almost 2/3 of it has disappeared by various means since Confederation. In some cases, the government failed to deliver as much land as specified in a treaty. In other words, it expropriated and sold reserve land rather rarely with First Nations as willing vendors. Once in a while, outright fraud took place. Even when First Nations were able to retain reserve land, the government sometimes sold its resources to outsiders. So we have lost our land. Next. Aboriginal lands today. Aboriginal lands south of the 60th parallel, mainly reserves, make up less than 0.5% of the Canadian land mass. By contrast, in the United States, excluding Alaska, where Aboriginal people make up a far smaller portion of the population, they hold 3% of the land. All of the reserves in every province in Canada combined would not cover 1/2 of the reservation held in the Arizona's Navajo Nation. Next one. So Canada's reserves wouldn't even fit in that one reserve in the States. In fact, next slide. 0.02% of the land our people own now. Next. when in fact we owned or we roamed this land, millions of my people, we have lost our land, our culture, our identity, and so on. Residential schools has had a great impact on us. Next. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been happening. It happened over 5 years. 7,000 survivors over 5 years they interviewed. Next. Let me just quickly read. 1840s, church-run school are established for Aboriginal children. 1883, federal government establishes 3 large residential schools in Western Canada. To kill the Indian in the child was the intent. 1920, Indian Act is amended to make it compulsory for status Indian children between 7 and 15 to attend residential schools. 70, the number of residential schools operating in the 1930s. 130, the total number of residential schools that received support from the federal government at the program's peak. 60%, the portion of residential schools run by the Catholic Church. And in 1996, the year the last residential school closes outside Regina. They just closed them. Next. 150,000, the estimated number of children who went through the residential school system. 80,000, the estimated number of residential school students still alive. Unknown, the number of children who died in Canada's residential schools. Provinces are still handing over death certificates for Aboriginal children from the residential school era. 60%, the mortality rate reached at sub-residential schools, according to the Truth and Reconciliation Chairman, Justice Murray Sinclair said. The testimony of residential school survivors. I attended the last Truth and Reconciliation in Edmonton. Halfway through the weekend, I was hearing all these negative comments by people who survived, and all of a sudden I just started to write down word for word things I heard people say, and they said things like this: sexual abuse, alcoholism, violence, incest, threatened like a dog, punished, stripped, strapped, beaten with a horse bridle, sniffers, drugs, rape, death words, you effing Indian, incarceration, overdose, dysfunctional, worthless, hopeless, powerless, you'll never amount to anything, funeral, crying, loneliness. Fear, I was afraid to tell the nun I had to go to the bathroom at night, so I wet my bed every night. They made me wear my wet bedsheet on my head to breakfast. Great pain. I lost my language, I lost my culture, I lost my identity, I feared God. Terrible life. Culture shock, fainted, homesick. I saw horrible things. Ears were bleeding because nuns and priests pulled our ears too hard. I couldn't talk to my siblings all year, even though they were in the same room. I no longer honored the church because it harmed me. Suffering. We were hoarded into a steam room. I couldn't breathe. I screamed for help, but no one heard me. I was pulled. They cut off my hair. They cut off my clothes, low self-esteem, grief, chaos, trauma. I was in 16 foster homes between the ages of 1 and 4. I thought my mom didn't love me. Why did she give me up? She said, I didn't give you up. They took you. There was no one to love me, hug me, or hold me. And I just wrote down what different people said. A life and a history of my people. No wonder my people are on the streets, in the pain that they still carry. The drinks and the drugs, folks, is only a cover-up to a deeper pain. Next, there's need for reconciliation. And finally, next one, there's really need for transformation where God becomes God in our hearts, and relationships become in their proper place, and other things take their proper place. Like there's need for transformation, both in your life and mine. And let's just go to the next one. We're 1 minute over, so I want to quit. I know brother has asked for some time, but yeah. If there's just a comment or a question, and then we'll close. Anybody? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Mm.
I'll be forever thankful.
Oh,
Have your
wow.
heart.
Folks, let me just say, I'm 65 years old in November. I've never tasted alcohol in my life. I've never puffed a cigarette. I've never taken illegal drugs. I've never been to jail other than visiting. And I have never had sexual intercourse with anybody other than my wife. And yet I felt so bad about Larry Wilson. Even though I have a good life, I've hated myself because of all the things you've heard here. And by the grace of God, I am who I am. Helen? Yeah.
I have had 60 years living with Anita. I understand what you've said. I understand a lot why it is so difficult for Native people to turn to Christ and stay there. And that there is enough focus. I have a lot of Native friends who will always be my friends.
Mm-hmm.
They will give me the hugs that they
Yep.
want.
Yep.
And they've been, they stand with me.
Yeah.
And I see so much potential in them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. No, I accept your heart. I really do. You know what? I really want to act like a white man right now and close and honor your time. Let me pray, okay? Father, I love these people because they bear the image of the living God stamped on their heart. And so do I. Father, I pray that you would help us. You're really real inside of us, and you care about reconciliation. You've called us all to that. I pray that you'd bless us to be an influence in the lives of people, not only in this room, but when we leave here, in our homes, with our children, our grandchildren. Please bless us, I pray. We need your help. I just want to say I love you. You're good. You're a good God. In Jesus' name, amen. We're done. Let's quit. Thanks.